Elisha's not going to be the one you want coming to plan the potluck. No matter how many people are coming, no matter how few, how small the number is of people who have signed up to bring something, his answer is always going to be the same. God will provide. I wonder what goes through the prophet's mind. I wonder what Elisha was thinking when he saw the person coming with the offering. Did he know at that moment that God would provide a miracle? Did he already have an idea that God would multiply this food to feed 100 people? Or was he so caught up, so focused on doing what God called him to do, that he just didn't doubt God would provide? God would do it somehow. I can't imagine what that would be like, because we plan for everything. Now, I'm just going to stick with church, because if we extended it into everyday life, we would all be raising our hands and testifying to the ways we plan things out, sometimes to the nth degree. But here in church, we plan everything. We have planning meetings. We have agendas for the meeting. So we plan for the planning meeting. We have a worship calendar, and sometimes we know months ahead what we're going to be doing. We have a basic framework way into the future. We put together a plan for our Wednesday nights. That's how I was able to alakazam. Sherry disappeared. I should not have my back turned when I expect. When Sherry, who was here previously, I saw her, when Sherry came up and talked about Wednesday nights, I was able to step up and say what we're doing because we have a plan for that. We know what the programming is. We advertise the menu ahead of time. We have a church budget. We have a deacon calendar, a missions council calendar, a children's ministry team calendar. Planning is what we do. It's who we are. And this passage from 2 Kings doesn't tell us not to plan. The message from a prophet doesn't contradict our desire to plan. Elisha reminds us that in spite of our planning, we need to put our trust in God. We need to focus so much that if what we're planning and what God delivers or what God calls us to do contradict one another, we go with God. If we're certain God's calling us to do something, then we cannot let our rational minds stand in the way. I don't think Elisha would have been fun to be around. If we read these words and look at the exchange, and if you read the preceding verses, Elisha was a straight shooter. Like Amos or Jeremiah, it seems like he had a one-track mind. He was straightforward and focused on doing God's will. So this reading from 2 Kings chapter 4 begins when somebody brought an offering. And this wasn't just any offering. This was a special offering. It demonstrated faithfulness and generosity. Even in a time of scarcity, this person brought the first fruits of the harvest, trusting that God would provide more later. This person responded to God's call for an offering, and I picture their response as an earnest, devout person setting out some of the best of what he had, bringing the best, setting it aside before anything else, and then taking it to Elisha and setting it in front of him. To us, the offering might seem small, but to the one bringing it, this would have been heroic generosity. Heroic generosity is that kind of giving that is a game changer. It's that kind of giving that can really transform lives. And Elisha's response is terse and to the point. He sees this offering and he says, give it to the people. He could have been a little more tactful. Maybe he could have said thank you. I'm a big proponent of that. When someone gives, when someone supports the church, when someone does anything, we should thank them. Maybe he could have, he's a prophet, maybe he could have said, well done, good and faithful servant. That would have been nice. And the Bible lacks stage directions. It doesn't give us much in the way of clues about vocal intonation. But his servant's response sounds like this dispassionate statement of fact. Maybe it was even sarcastic. Maybe I'm reading into it. But the servant said, "How can I set this out for 100 people? Are you serious?" Elisha repeated his command. He offered a little bit of explanation, but it's basically a straightforward repetition. Give it to the people, for thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left. Like Jess is reading from Luke 6. Blessed are those who hunger, for they shall be filled. But it still sounds unfeeling. Elisha saying, this is what God said to do, so do it. Stop quibbling with me. Did I stutter? Now, personally, I believe in collaboration. We work together on many things. Elizabeth is learning how much we talk about all these things and go through what we're going to be doing in the life of the church. And it's a dialogical approach where we think it through together because together we're more than the sum of our parts. I always say, let's talk about that. Think about different viewpoints. Not Elisha. He didn't work that way. He had one focus, and in this case, he knew he was right. He recognized the person's stewardship to God, saw a need, and trusted God for the rest. This person brought an offering. This person from Baal Shalasha not only brought God his best, it was his first fruits. This was the first bit of his harvest. And this example, the example we see in this passage is of someone who trusted that God would provide more. This wouldn't be it. In a time when we can run to the grocery store for almost anything we can imagine, whether it's in season or not, this person's sacrifice is difficult to fathom. We cannot conceive the struggle people faced with basic provisions in ancient times. This is why some of the most profound miracles involve abundances where there is nothing. Feeding the 5,000. The promise in Luke of those to those who hunger, they will be filled. When we read Elisha's feeding miracle and think of it alongside the reading in John 6 of the feeding of 5,000, feeding 100 can seem paltry. He didn't do that much. 100, come on, just you wait. Jesus is going to feed 5,000, Elisha. Don't get stuck on yourself. Yet the richness of this reading is the culmination of Elisha's ministry of life. When we put this life-giving ministry along with his earlier miracles, we get to see how God's prophet cared about people. Maybe he was rude at times, but he cared. He cared about people. He cared about their needs. He cared about where they were, what they were struggling with, and what they actually faced. He began his ministry earlier by providing a fountain of oil for a widow who was in debt. This was in the very beginning of chapter 4 in 2 Kings. She cried out to him, I'm alone in the world. I have nothing, and a creditor has come after me. I don't have anything, just I have a little bit of oil at home. Elisha heard this cry and said, hold my goblet. Go borrow every jar, vessel, and Tupperware you can. Go in your house, shut the door, and take that little bit of oil you have and start pouring it in to the first jar. Then pour it into the vessel. Then fill the Tupperware. And then sell that oil to pay off your debt. Elisha's miracle of economic enablement follows a theme that weaves through his and his predecessor Elijah's stories. In 2 Kings chapter 2, Elisha made a previously toxic spring potable. He fed the Shunammite widow and raised her son from the dead. He detoxified a cooking pot that had been making people sick. He might not have been fun. His words may have been a little bit too direct, maybe even abrupt, but he was obsessed with doing God's work. Also, according to 2 Kings 2 and Chapter 2, verse 23, he seemed to be a little touchy about his baldness too. But he cared about people. He really cared about people. All these miracles were for the sake of people who were in tangible need, physical need, people who were suffering, people who were struggling, people who were oppressed in some way. As a prophet, he addressed the heroic generosity of these first fruits and turned that to hospitality. Yes, the food was an offering, and yes, it's a paltry amount for 100 people. Still, they were hungry, and now he had food. Chun Liang Sao writes that Elisha's ministry is remarkably mundane. I found that a little startling. But she goes on to say that his ministry was about freedom and life for the destitute, hope for the childless, restoration of a dead child to a desperate mother, and food for the hungry. These actions go beyond grand gestures. They touch the minutiae of life, the daily grind of trying to survive and trying to get through. His ministry is for and among ordinary people, and he helps people with the mundane, personal needs of living day by day. And that's what it means to be one of God's followers. As a people who claim this label, us, who come together to sing, to praise, and to laugh, as we claim this label, Christ follower, we learn from people like Elisha and his predecessor Elijah and Amos and Jeremiah, and we see them all through the lens of Jesus Christ. We might not be able to raise to life the dead child of a grieving widow, but we can offer comfort to those who mourn. Elsewhere in the Sermon on the Plain, it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted." We probably can't feed 100 people with some biscuits and a few ears of grain. But we can use what we have. We can respond. We can act in heroic generosity. We can reach out. Last year, we combined our resources. We came together with our hands and our human resources. We came together with our funds. And we joined with Rise Against Hunger and prepared 106,056 meals. It might not be as impressive as the time Jesus fed the 5,000 with just some loaves and fish. It might not be like Elisha taking some biscuits and somehow feeding 100 people. But after God worked through us, there were 106,000 meals in the world that weren't there before. What's next? What is God calling us to do? What is that prophetic voice that is telling us to do something that we cannot imagine is possible? See, there's a calling right in front of us. There's something right there. It's up to us to have the eyes to see, the ears to hear the voice of the divine, the wisdom to know this is what God is calling us to do. What is it? See, that's the beauty of being a part of this family. It doesn't come through me. Or it shouldn't. It comes from you. What is God leading us to do? What is God calling us to do? What's next? God's plans are amazing. If the Bible offers us any kind of an insight to the nature of God, it's that God can do anything, and the plans are pretty incredible. And we have the opportunity, we always have that chance to get on board with what God is doing. And I don't know what God has in store for us next. But as I've been spending time with these prophets, the more time I spend, the more I realize that God's got something for us, and it's up to us to open our eyes and look for it. Back to Elisha. If he does plan the church potluck, show up. Expect something beyond whatever you imagined, and ask if you brought any gravy to go on those biscuits. Amen.